Hello, everyone, and welcome to our July edition of MEIEA Meets. My name is Armin Shayomian. I am the president of MEIEA, the Music and Entertainment Industry Educators Association. I hope you're having a good summer so far, a very well-deserved break, I'm sure. A couple of things to kind of cover before we get started. The full 40-second MEIEA Summit archive is now available on our YouTube channel. And so to access that, please visit MEIEA.org, where you can find our YouTube channel, our Facebook group, and LinkedIn page as well for upcoming MEIEA events. Also, I want to let you know that this meeting is recorded. We post all of our MEIEA Meets events on our YouTube channel, and we also record it for archiving purposes as well. You will see a MEIEA moderator on the chat side. If you have any direct questions, feel free to send it there. But this will be kind of an open discussion, and so otherwise the chat is visible and we can all kind of participate. I am going to hand it over now to Mr. Paul Coleman over at MusicID, and he is gonna take it from here. Paul, go ahead.
Hi, Armin. Thank you so much. Hopefully you can see and hear me okay this time. I know we had some problems at the MEIEA Meets event. Great. Welcome, everybody. Thank you all for joining us on this Friday in your holidays, as Armin said. I just wanted to say a few words before I hand over to my colleague, Dr. Craig Hamilton, just on behalf of the management team and all the team, in fact, here at MusicID. Hopefully many of you will have participated or even seen the panel event that we hosted, and we are very, very proud sponsors of the MEIEA Summit in 2021. And it was a great honor actually to be invited to do so. And thank you very much, Armin, and all your team for running such a fantastic event, which I know went down extremely well in these very difficult times for everybody working remotely. But I just wanted to spend a couple of minutes very briefly now for those of you who don't know us or aren't so aware of us or weren't participating in the event. Just a quick overview of MusicID, who we are, and then get straight into the Meets event, which is why you're all here. But just to remind you, so MusicID, our mission is to be the premier online platform and data archive for the academic community in the music and creative industries. And ultimately, we are here to support the adoption of empirical data and data science in humanities teaching. That's our mission, and that's a large part of some of the inspiration that Dr. Craig Hamilton is going to be providing with us today. I wanted to thank anyone here who also participated in the panel event, because we had such amazing feedback from that. And I just want to say thanks again for all of our new customers as well, who have actually been onboarding with us this week and have taken us up on our MEIEA special offer. So just to mention to everybody here, if you see some things today, if you're interested in learning more about MusicID off the back of our presentation, then exclusive for MEIEA members, we're offering a 15% discount on new customers that are attending the MEIEA Meets event today. And we're also providing these free teaching support resources, so free curriculum support resources on how to introduce data science and data literacy, most importantly, into your teaching and your current modules. And so we'll happily be providing that to anybody that wants it during the course of today. That's available from our website. We'll drop our website on the chat, but the website, for those of you who don't know it, it's musicidhub.com. Before I pass you over to Dr. Craig Hamilton, I do want to make one final announcement, and that is the announcement today, which is very exciting, which is for a call for proposals for our MusicID Digital Research Fellowship in 2021. So this is actually our 4th annual Digital Research Fellowship for anyone studying popular music studies. Basically, we award this fellowship competitively to scholars at any phase of their careers. So it's designed to support popular music research and data storytelling, anything that uses data to reveal new insights or reinforce previous understandings or theories. And the winner, the recipient, will receive $1,000 prize immediately and access to the MusicID platform for 1 year. Any applicants also will receive access to the platform for a lesser time, but the winner gets $1,000 and access for a year. In order to apply for that, it's very simple. Apply online. We've had some very prestigious winners in the last few years. So in 2018, we had Thomas Johnson of Skidmore College, who won with his identity, genre, and chart success. In 2019, we had Ali Martin of the Indiana University Bloomington, whose piece was Ring the Alarm, Tracking Chart Performance During Black Lives Matter, 2014 to 2019. And last year, we were very pleased to be involved with Eduard Arriaga of University of Indianapolis, who put forward his proposal, Reggaeton Without Blackness, Tracking Afro-Latinx Roots and Latinx Community Contemporary Music. And so we've got a lot of very exciting things going on there. So I do hope that you will also have a look, encourage yourselves, encourage your students, encourage anyone you know to have a look at this. I've just put a link in the chat there to the Digital Research Fellowship. So please have a look at that after today or during the course of today, and encourage as many people as you can to come, get involved, be part of our community, and make the best of it. So having said all of that, I'd like to pass you over now to Dr. Craig Hamilton, who will be providing us with some fantastic inspiration on how we can include data storytelling in a compelling and innovative way within our day-to-day teaching as educators. So Craig, over to you, and thank you very much.
Thanks, Paul, and hello, everybody. It's great to see so many joining us this afternoon. I'm here in late afternoon, not quite so sunny Birmingham in the UK, but it'd be great if you could say hello in the chat and let us know where you're from. I'm gonna share my screen at this end because I've got a few slides to show you, and then I'm going to do a demonstration with the MusicID platform. So just bear with me a second while I share some slides. And all being well, you will see something in a moment. Can everybody see that? Hopefully, I'm going to take that as a yes. If I can get some thumbs up, great, thank you. Okay, so hello. My name is Dr. Craig Hamilton. Well, I'm Craig Hamilton, Dr. Craig Hamilton, and I'm a research fellow in the Centre for Media and Cultural Research at Birmingham City University in the UK. My research focuses on the role of data-derived technologies on the business and cultural environments of popular music. I run the annual Archive project, which since 2013 has been collecting data from music consumers about their everyday music reception practices, and charts how that changes over time. I'm also involved with research that looks at the role of mobile applications at music festivals, and I'm currently researching the UK live music industry's response to the twin threats of Brexit and COVID-19. And along the way there, I've produced some interactive online maps for a number of UK cities. You can see more about my work on my website there. But in all of my research activity, I like to take a practice-led approach to data. And that has involved the development of skills associated with the digital humanities and with the data sciences. And this often includes working with large data sets. And that has led me to learn how to work with coding languages such as R and machine learning techniques as a means of getting to grips with how services like Spotify, Google, Twitter, and others have contributed to the seismic changes in how we now make, market, sell, listen to, and ultimately make meaning from popular music. In my teaching roles too, I've attempted to transfer some of those skills to my students in order to help them prepare for jobs and opportunities in an increasingly data-led music industries. I'm very pleased then to be working with MusicID and MEIEA on today's session. In the session today, I'm going to deliver a sample lesson, essentially, the aim of which is to demonstrate how data and the MusicID platform could be used in the delivery of lessons and courses for your students. Now, many of you, I'm sure, will be familiar with the fairly common practice, interview practice within higher education institutions, where candidates are asked to deliver a sample lesson as part of the interview process. So the lesson I'm going to deliver will be along those lines. However, before I start and afterwards, I'll provide some context for you as the audience that I hope will enable you to see how a similar type of lesson could be developed using the MusicID platform. At certain points in the lesson, there will be space for short discussions for students and exercises. I won't run these, rather I'll describe them to you and how I would see them working within a lesson. However, along the way during the course of the mini lesson, there are some points where I would ask questions, so feel free to turn your mic on and answer as if you were an eager undergrad student. For the sake of clarity, the lesson is broadly aimed at undergraduate students who are enrolled on a course or module related to popular music. So before starting, I'll briefly lay out the structure of the lesson for you, and then I'll indicate when that introductory part is over and when the lesson itself has begun. At the end, hopefully we can have a discussion around what you've seen, and also more broadly around using data in music pedagogy. And I know that Paul and Katie from MusicID are on hand to answer any specific questions you might have about the platform that I'm unable to answer. Before we get to that, and for those of you who may not be familiar with it, I'm just going to provide a little bit of information about MusicID and the broader body of work that I'm involved in with them. I'm pressing on the wrong button, there we go. So MusicID is the leading academic platform and aggregator of global music chart data, incorporating over 5,000 different charts from 74 countries and over 500 million lines of data. Sort of thing that gets me excited in my research activity. It provides unique access to contemporary and historical source music industry data around physical purchase, digital download, and even Spotify streaming. There's over 120 years worth of records, and that enables researchers and students to visualize, explore, compare, and download data patterns and infographics for sales revenue and the cultural impact of artists, albums, and singles across the world. In the last few months, I've been helping MusicID put together a package of resources which are outlined in this document. There's essentially 8 parts to this resource pack, organized around 8 areas, including data and the value chain, analysis and visualization, and so on. The lesson I've developed for today, the sample lesson, covers a few of those bases, but broadly it focuses on 2 elements of what is data and historical context. The aim of the lesson is to demonstrate how MusicID and data visualizations can be used as the basis for a lesson that could assist students in 3 ways. So the first is around data, is sort of questions around data literacy, which essentially boil down to understanding and interpreting data and visualizations, and just being familiar with and comfortable with looking at those sort of things and working with data. The second is how data can be used to help understand and illustrate particular moments in music's history. And the third, and perhaps equally importantly, but perhaps most importantly of all, is to help students develop critical perspectives when it comes to data, which, as we know, is so central to everything that happens in popular music these days. To try and help students explore questions that arise from examining data and to approach data in critical ways. The lessons divided into 4 parts, some of which I'll run through, some of which I won't. There's a sort of a mini lecture bit at the start, which is around understanding data visualizations, and that's the bit where I'd like you to join in if you feel inclined. Then there's a practical demonstration of creating some graphs in MusicID. There's then an exercise which we won't run, but I'll explain it to you as what I would get students to do if this were a real lesson. And then at the end, there's a discussion that I would also engage in with students, which again we won't run, but we'll have a discussion of our own at the end of the session. I've also added in some directed studies and set readings as well, which I'll walk through really briefly. So by the end of this session, the aim of it really is students should be able to explain the basic components of a data visualization. They should get some an introductory feel for the MusicID platform and be able to create their own graphs. And then perhaps crucially, use that graph that they've created as the basis for some question formulation. So, oh, there's my slide that I've just explained. So this is the point now where I'm going to ask you to stop being music educators and to perhaps put yourselves into the body of an imaginary undergraduate popular music student, and we'll dive into the lesson. Okay. So hello, everybody. My name's Dr. Craig Hamilton, and today we're going to be talking about data visualizations in order to explore two broad questions. The first is, what are data visualizations and what can they tell us? The second is, how are they made, and how can understanding this help us explore some broader questions? To do this, we're going to be looking at some popular music data visualizations and exploring what they can tell us. But importantly, we're also going to be looking at what they don't tell us. And we're going to try and figure out if we can answer those questions by doing some further research based on what we see. By exploring what visualizations do and do not tell us, we're going to start thinking about some of the bigger questions. These will relate to how data is collected, what it means, and so on. Along the way, you're going to build some visualizations of your own, and we'll work together on interpreting what they do and don't show us. So let's start by looking at some data visualizations that might be familiar to some of you. So here is quite evidently a map of the United States. Now you can obviously tell by my accent, presumably, that I'm from Great Britain. I'm English. So if you can imagine for a second that we don't get a great deal of news over here about the United States, I've been told that this is a map showing how votes went in the last presidential election. And based on this information, it would appear to me that the red team seemed to be the most successful. Would that be the case? I'm going to assume the answer is no. If nobody wants to turn, does anybody want to turn their mic on and have an answer at that question?
Negative.
Negative. Thank you. Thanks, Chris. Yes, this visualization kind of seems to indicate that the red half won the election. But if we look at the same visualization in a slightly different way, it gives us a different picture. We can see that some of those blue areas that don't really show up on the map so much, actually, when we add in a variable related to population size, we can see that the picture changes. And actually, there's a lot more blue on this map than there is on this map, even though it's exactly the same country, it's showing exactly the same data set, albeit with an additional variable. Okay, so there's something here around how data visualizations or the same data can be presented in more than one way. I'm going to show you another one now. This is a visualization that dates back pretty much to World War II. Now, the British forces wanted to understand how they could protect their aeroplanes on bombing raids and other missions. And so they started collecting data on the planes that made it home and where they were hit to see if they could work out how they could stop their other planes being shot down. Can anybody perhaps hazard give me some information or an insight into why this data visualization wouldn't be particularly helpful in telling you how to stop your planes being shot down? I've had undergrad classes like this myself. It must be, this is a class like on a Monday morning.
Yeah, I mean, what are the red, is that bullet holes?
That's bullet holes on the planes, yes. These are all the places where the planes were hit. But these were the planes that made it home, if that's a clue. This,
well,
okay.
Each battle's different.
Each battle's different, certainly.
These are the planes that made it home.
These are the planes, these are the planes that made it home. These weren't the planes that were shot down. Okay, so we don't know anything about the planes that were shot down. They could have been shot on the nose. They could have been shot by the propellers. Okay, so this data set, although it's quite a nice visualization and it appears to give us some information, that may be useful around protecting our aeroplanes in bombing missions and so on, actually we're missing the most crucial piece of information, which is where the planes that went down were hit. This is often referred to as survivor bias in data visualizations and other analysis. Okay, I'm going to give you a third one here. Now, this is a timeline visualization, which obviously shows time along the bottom. You can see 1999, 2000, 2001. The red line shows the number of people who drowned in swimming pools each year. And the black line shows us the number of films that Nicolas Cage appeared in each of those years. And if we follow the path of the red line and the black line, we appear to see that there's quite a close relationship between the number of people who drowned in pools and the number of films that Nicolas Cage appeared in. However, whether you're a huge fan of Nicolas Cage or not, I think it's a bit of a stretch to make a link between his movie appearances and the number of people who unfortunately died by drowning in a pool.
It makes sense to me.
Well, yeah, other people have said that too. I mean, particularly some of Nicolas Cage's movies, the ones he makes when he's got a big tax bill, certainly would make you want to jump into a pool. But clearly, there's no real, although the data shows a correlation, there's clearly not a relationship between Nicolas Cage's movie output and deaths in swimming pools, okay? So these three data visualizations show us that there are different types of data that can be visualized in many different ways, okay? So we saw that in the United States electoral results map, and that actually if you add in or remove variables or visualize data in particular ways, you can tell a particular story, okay? So that should lead us to questions of, well, what data is behind the visualization? Who has created the visualization and why? Okay, sometimes the data in the question are incompatible, as we saw with the airplane data. Okay, and even though the data visualization might appear to tell us something meaningful and communicate something that might be useful, actually, when we delve behind what we're seeing, we know really that we can't answer the question with that visualization. And sometimes the patterns are just meaningless, okay? So this is kind of to get you thinking about, well, just because a visualization is pretty, it might be interactive, it might appear to give the answers. You need to be a little bit critical and think about how the visualization was put together and why. So what is the data behind the visualization? What is it showing us? Where does the data come from? Does it help us answer our question? Does that lead to further questions, whether that's about the question that we can answer or the questions that we can't answer? So now we're going to look at two different types of music industry's data visualization and ask similar questions. So this first one you may well have seen, it's been doing the rounds on the internet for quite some time. We're clearly seeing figures from the early 80s, the mid 80s running through the 90s and up to the 2000s. And this visualization is showing us the market share of various physical and digital formats over time. And what we see once it rolls back to the beginning again, which it will do in a second, is that cassettes were the primary form purchased, this yellow part in the 80s. They slowly gave way to the CD during the late 80s and the 90s. The red part here, we see that the CD starts to pretty much eat the whole pie by the time we get to the late 90s. And then shortly thereafter, the red part of the pie starts to shrink and it becomes a hugely complex pie with lots and lots of different digital formats starting to become the mode in which people purchase, okay? We can see that same information on a less flashy visualization, which here shows us the same information. We can see that light blue area here representing cassettes, which then gave way to the dark blue area of CDs, and finally giving way to the purple and pink areas representing digital modes of digital formats. We've also got vinyl here in light green, which goes back a little bit further. But there's one piece of information on this visualization that isn't available on the other ones. Can anybody hazard a guess at what that was? What that is, rather? I'll just go back to the other one.
Gross sales.
Correct. Yes, thank you. We don't have any revenue on this one. At this, even though the circle changes size because of the way it's rendered, really this is just showing us the overall percentages. It's not showing us how big the pie was. Whereas this visualization tells us that there's a great deal of revenue in the late 70s. There's a huge amount of revenue from the mid 90s onwards and the late early 2000s. And then things start to drop away shortly thereafter. And really this is the same, like with the other visualizations, we've got 3 pieces of information shown in the animated pie chart: time, music format, and market share. Whereas in the bar chart, we've got time, music format, market share, and revenue adjusted for inflation. Now, if you didn't adjust that for inflation, the bars would be slightly different. So again, there are different ways we can look at this data, okay? So when we look at something like this, you know, the question certainly that I would like you in this module to work towards is like, well, what happened? How did it happen? And how can we use these data visualizations to help us answer those questions? And we want to explore the stories and events behind the data. So for example, you read a lot of column inches at the moment about, certainly in the UK, and I'm assuming it's similar in the US, about how everybody buys vinyl these days, how the vinyl's back and it's the most popular format. But actually, when we look at the contribution that it makes to overall revenue, it's rather small, okay? So there's something there around how vinyl is framed rhetorically by either the industry or the media, how people talk about it, that perhaps overinflates its value in terms of financial contribution. We might also want to look at this massive blue area in the 90s. And again, I'm sure I don't need to tell you educators this, but maybe the students would be interested in the story of how the majors consolidated during this time, how the CD came along, the emergence of CD megastores and Walmart and places like that that sold a lot of units but carried a very small inventory. The way that the industry marketed to the person who in the UK we referred to as £50 man. And this was a person who on payday every month would treat themselves to make maybe a nice new shirt and a new CD. And they were the people primarily who purchased Coldplay CDs in their millions and things like that. So there's a story there to be told by the data. We might also want to look at, well, how did that purple area emerge in the 2010s and thereafter? And so if I asked you a question for maybe an assignment to ask me, well, how did that happen? Those of you who wanted to get, you know, a pass mark without particularly getting a high mark would just sort of explain to me that Spotify came along and that's how streaming started to generate some revenue. But if you were to use a visualization like this to maybe delve a little bit deeper and look at how some of these peaks and troughs occurred over time, you might go all the way back to 1979, when the majors sort of collaborated on inventing the CD before launching it in 1982. And after that, you can see this very small dark blue part appearing, where the CD started to contribute to revenues. Meanwhile, in 1987, some guys in Germany started doing some research in a lab, but we'll get back to those guys in a minute. As you know, research takes a long time, and it was about 7 years before they eventually launched an MP3 player, and mp3.com came along in 1995. But at the time, the internet wasn't particularly everywhere, certainly here in the UK, and people were still buying CDs in huge numbers. Okay, they weren't particularly interested in this new MP3 technology until Napster came along in 1999, which enabled people to grab these MP3 files in huge numbers from the internet. And we see then that shortly thereafter, sales start to drop off on CDs, or certainly the revenue does. You can see that after the peak around 1999, things start to tail off rather quickly. 2001, Apple launched the Ipod, which made all of these freely available MP3s portable in a desirable product. They then started selling downloads in 2003 with the launch of iTunes. And for the first time, we see that purple line appear on the revenue channel. 2005, YouTube came along, and all of a sudden there was another means of getting free music that that you didn't have to purchase on CD anymore. And again, we can see this tailing off of the blue line. The smartphone came along and started to become ubiquitous from 2007 onwards, and things really started to tail off for the CD. And then it wasn't until 2009 that Spotify launched. So there's a whole technological story to be told and extracted from this data, if you ask the right questions, that lead us up to the point that Spotify emerged. And you can even then go further and look at some of the historical points in Spotify, such as when it limited free listening in the States before launching, before it purchased Echo Nest in 2014 and started focusing on algorithmic recommendation. Okay, so from just this one graph, we can kind of explore how streaming took over, and I've only told that story according to a technological perspective. You could tell that story a number of other ways, such as through legislation like the Digital Millennium Copyright Act and all of that sort of thing. We might ask questions about, well, can we trust the data beyond this visualization? It came from the IFPI. There are loads of questions we can ask around that. We might also ask what might be missing. So people who don't report to the IFPI, all of those CDs sold at gigs and so on and so forth, they're part of music industries as well. So there's lots of things we can look at there, but the graph is a way in to asking those questions and exploring those questions. So with that in mind, I'm going to quickly jump over to the MusicID platform, and we're going to log into the platform, search for artists, create a graph, and try and navigate that graph. Okay, so just bear with me 1 second while I switch over. How do I just have a look? View, enter full screen. Can you guys see that? Looking good. Okay, so we're on the MusicID main page here, and there are two ways you can search. First of all, I'm going to show you the date search function, and then I'm going to do a little biographical study of an artist using the keyword function. So the date search is fairly simple. I'm going to put in my birthday, show you all how old I am. 13th of January 1974. Where are we? There we go. I want to look at the Great Britain chart and the top 200 albums. And this is going to show me a graph here. And here are the top 10 albums in the chart in that week. And we can zoom in on that particular week. We can see here my birthday here, the 13th of January. Charts in the UK were announced on Thursdays at this particular time. Number one in the charts before I was born was Yes. Number two was Emerson, Lake and Palmer. I'm not a great big fan of prog, I have to say. However, I am a big fan of glam rock, and I'm very pleased to see that in the week that I was born, a band from my hometown, Slade, started the week at number 10 in the charts, and then the following week they made it all the way to number 1. Okay, so that's just a quick demonstration of how you can very quickly create a graph in MusicID. But let's get to the keyword search. I want to look for a particular artist, Amy Winehouse. We search for Amy, we see artists here. She will appear a couple of times. I always select her more than once. You can remove duplicates at the next stage. What I want to look at here is the Great Britain chart. Again, you can use any chart, but I'm more familiar with the UK chart, so I'm going to use that. I want to look at albums, the date first charted, and I want to look at Amy's debut album, Frank, and its position in the album charts. You can see here jazz albums, Scottish albums. It's the main album chart I'm concerned with. I want to add that to my clipboard, which you can see here, and I want to view it on the graph. Okay, so hopefully you can see that. This is Amy Winehouse's debut album, which we can see here charted in 2003. It hung around the charts for quite some time. This long line here tells me that it went out of the charts, but then came back into the charts at this point, was in the charts for some considerable time again, dropped out, disappeared, came back, disappeared again, came back. So from the data, one of the questions I want to ask is, well, why does an album by this artist appear to have 4 life cycles? Okay, so I'll work through the first one, but I want to ask you some questions about the other 2. So the first one, let's look at that here. This is a pretty common sort of album cycle for a major label breaking an artist. Okay, the album comes out here, it hangs around the charts, but doesn't do particularly well. But then we see it jumping up in the charts at various points as singles are released. Okay, if we look at the singles for Amy, we can see that they chart around this particular time. This is a fairly nice case study of a successful major label project to break an artist into the charts. They've done pretty well here. And if we looked at similar artists, such as Coldplay or such as other major label artists' debut albums, we'd see similar sort of things as this. If you look at Parachutes by Coldplay, you see a similar sort of similar sort of chart graph to this. But then it drops out of the chart, and you might say, well, that's the end of Amy. We'll never hear any more about this artist. But we get another life cycle for Frank in the charts, and then we get another peak here, another peak here. Can anybody hazard a guess at why Frank might have re-entered the charts circa 2007?
I don't know when she died, but that probably had something to do with it.
Okay, you're jumping ahead. You're answering a question that, if you can save that answer for me for about 3 minutes time, I will say thank you very much. But you're not right on this instance. What generally happens after a successful debut album release?
Follow-up release.
A follow-up release. Thank you. So we can go back to the charts here. Look at Amy again. Look at the Great British Chart. Look at albums, and I know that her second album was Back to Black, and here we are. I can add that to my clipboard and view that on the graph, and here we see Back to Black. Now we see Frank there in the orange and Back to Black, and we can see just from zooming in here that Back to Black, certainly in the UK, was an absolutely monstrous record. It was barely out of the top 10 for over 18 months. Now, at that point, a lot of people who hadn't bought Frank would have discovered Amy, okay? And I'm sure when you discover a new band, one of the first things that you want to do is you want to go back and see what else they've done. And clearly here we can see Frank getting dragged along back into the charts by the success of Back to Black, okay? And it had a second chart life thanks to the success of Back to Black, okay? But then we see Back to Black and Frank kind of come to the end of its promotional, well, Back to Black comes to the end of its promotional cycle, although Back to Black being such a huge album hangs around a little bit longer. But then we see them both in this period here out of the charts, okay? And then in around August 2007, they take the number 1 and number 5 position in the album charts, almost in a bullet, as they like to say. So my colleague who answered the question before, this is your moment to shine. Why do you think this might have happened?
She passed.
She passed. Unfortunately, Amy Winehouse, after suffering a lot of personal problems, she passed away. And as often happens when an artist passes away, the record companies and people are interested in her, and it pushes the album back up the charts. Okay. We also can see perhaps some of the cynical behavior of record labels in this instance, because one thing that's certainly not going to happen after an artist passes away is that they won't be making any more records. So we see that shortly after Amy's passing, the record company rushed out, and just in time for Christmas, how lucky was that? They rushed out Hidden Treasures, okay, another album here which performed well in the charts and was a #1 album. Okay, so we've got death there. Amy's death, unfortunately, is another element of behind the third life of her debut album. Then we've got the fourth one, which is perhaps trickier to put a finger on. But why? Can anybody guess as to why we might have had a fourth life for the debut album? Fans of Amy might know this, but those of you might not. For the sake of time, I'm going to answer that question. There was a documentary that came out in 2014, which again brought Amy back into the public consciousness, which again forced albums back up the charts. And we can see that again in the data when we see the soundtrack to that album, and view that on the graph. Takes the graph a second or so to catch up. That light blue line there is the soundtrack album, okay? And again, based on the success of the documentary and of the soundtrack album, if we remove Back to Black and Lioness, the cash-in album, we can see that the documentary, which came out at around this point, also led people to discover Amy again, or new people to discover Amy, and of course go out and buy this album that dated back to 2003. I'm going to escape out of my full screen mode now and go back to my slides. Just bear with me a second. So in the lesson, now this is the case study I've just gone through. In the lesson now for student, you're all able to see these screens, these slides, yes? I'm assuming yes.
Yes, all good, Craig.
In the class, if this were a real lesson, what I would now get the students to go away and do is to replicate what I've just done, to create a simple graph for an artist or song, to maybe look at the top 10 albums on the day they were born or on some other significant date. I would work with them in the class on troubleshooting some of the issues around any issues they had with creating their graphs. I'd then lead them in a discussion in what we'd seen today, and talking about how data can help us in the research process, some of the things that we need to be aware of, what some of the critical and practical skills we might need. I'd put them in groups and get them to discuss that. At the end of the lesson, I'd quickly recap on what we'd seen. I'd set them a directed study on, building on the graph they'd made, and get them to explore some of the peaks and troughs like I'd done with Amy Winehouse in terms of either biographical context or industrial context, social context. Get them to reflect on the process of interpreting that graph and try and, depending on the module, try and develop that into some form of research question for their larger assignment. I'd point them to some resources such as the how-to MusicID videos. There's some readings here, Steve Jones's article on being better off dead or making it the hard way. The Amy documentary, there's some here around that graph that I showed about telling the technological story of how Spotify emerged. There's a great book by Stephen Witt, which isn't necessarily academic work, but a great introduction to that whole area. And then just some nice gentle introductions to the grammar of graphics about how to read data visualizations. So that's the end of my sample lesson. We've got around about 15 minutes, I believe. So I'd like to open up into a broader discussion, maybe around the use of data and pedagogy in the classroom, which is similar to the panel discussion that we had at the MEIEA Summit. Any ideas that you might have for similar or along similar lines to what I've done with the Amy case study. There are Paul and Katie from MusicID are on hand to answer any practical questions that you might have about the MusicID platform. But I'd like to say thank you very much for listening. I hope that was useful and informative. And being as this was a sample lesson in an imaginary recruitment process, I hope you'll give me the job. So thank you for listening, and let's go back into the room for a discussion. so I don't know whether I know Katie and people have been monitoring questions in the chat. So I guess I'll lead on this if there are questions, or if anybody wants to raise their hand and shout out a question.
Yeah, if anyone has any immediate questions for Craig in terms of maybe the content that was covered off, or how we might typically approach it. I know there's a few people that definitely want to have a conversation with you, Craig, about it separately offline, which is also fair enough. If people are happy to direct message Craig or myself or Katie with their email addresses, then we can put you all in contact. That's absolutely not a problem.
I think the other thing maybe I didn't say in the presentation that might get the ball rolling is that I found quite a lot of ideas from just playing with the system. It's like any kind of interface, really. The first time you're faced with it, you kind of, well, where does everything go? But within about sort of 20 minutes, it's quite intuitive. And I came up with a couple of other ideas for lessons. So I had one around telling the history of how the charts were counted in the United Kingdom by showing the question being, are all number ones equal? So it kind of enabled me to show Al Martino's Here in My Heart, which was the first UK number one in 1952. But that was number one because a music trade magazine rang up 12 shops in London and asked them what they'd sold that week. So that was how the number one was counted in the UK then. But then you can travel that through all the way through to Gnarls Barkley in 2006, which was the first number one counted on downloads, and so on and so forth. So I came up with a lot of ideas for how I could kind of incorporate that sort of thing into lessons around either music history or music business, which might be a good starting point.
Craig, hi, it's your colleague Matt here.
Hi, Matt.
How you doing? Thanks for that. It was really good. And I mean, you and I have talked together. So I think what you picked up then about the simplicity of it's really quite important, because when I work with data with some of my students, the minute you start talking about it, they just find the whole thing quite overwhelming, because they've come to a course where they're not expecting to have to engage with mathematics in any shape or form, well, unless they're counting money. So I think it's really good that you picked up on that idea, that showing us around that and actually how easy it is to drill down to certain aspects of a particular thing that you're looking for is great. And I think that's the sort of thing that will make students feel a lot more confident about dealing with data, because it's presented in a way that is accessible. And, you know, all credit to MusicID, Paul, and all your staff for creating that platform and make it easy to navigate. I think the other great thing about it is it's an opportunity for students to start looking at how we can potentially come to that critical theory part of it you're talking about at the end, and start breaking down some of these myths and narratives that exist around popular music, or certainly popular music studies. And, you know, you'll get stories, your students will say to you, oh, well, of course, you know, this music's absolutely new music. And you're going, well, no, there's no such thing as new music. It's building on the past. And I'm going to now show you with some data how grime has come from this and how that has come from that. And so it's really good at being able to show students, you know, how you can break down some of those media sort of generated myths around popular music. So I think that's really good. And I've said in the chat, I will talk to you about this next time with at work.
Absolutely. Well, yeah. One of the first ideas I looked at, we've just had the 49th anniversary of David Bowie doing Starman on Top of the Pops in the UK, which is seen as a hugely significant moment in Matt will, you know, anybody, and I don't, but he appeared on Top of the Pops, and, you know, 1 million bands were formed as a consequence of this TV appearance. So I was going to look at that. And actually I looked at that's one of the other ideas I had, was I looked at the chart placings, and it did nothing. Starman did not rise up the charts the following week following that moment. So it's a moment in the collective understanding of popular music in the United Kingdom that is huge, like you say, hugely overinflated and not reflected in the sales figures, which is quite interesting.
I think they were too busy forming bands rather than buying records.
Well, maybe. But I like the point. Yeah, I think the point about it being quite intuitive and easy for students is good. Sorry, like there's a question there. What the fact that data? There's a question here about what do you think of the fact that the data of Asian musicians is less than that of Western musicians? I've recently studied the difference between Chinese and Western music data. Musical, I would like to hear your suggestion. Can I point this question towards Paul and Katie in turn? Because I know that there are 74 countries in MusicID, so maybe they could be able to point you towards which countries might help you answer that question. If that's okay, Paul and Katie.
Yeah, absolutely. Well,
if that is indeed the question.
Katie is our resident academic, who's also the expert on this side of things, is quite good to answer. But MusicID does actually have quite a lot of Asian countries in there. Obviously, chart data really is emanating from when those charts were first created, and the reality is that a lot of countries didn't really start having charts even up until the 1980s. And again, this opens up the whole conversation piece as well about what is data, what can you trust, where is it coming from, and what chart data might be available for say any country. Where is it actually being sourced from? A lot of them have started very late down the line. Obviously it all started with the US Billboard sort of back in the 50s. But how do you actually interpret that? We certainly have chart data from 74 countries, and now, well, more than that globally, because we now have all of the modern streaming data, Spotify, Shazam, Apple Music, iTunes, all of that up to current date is all actually available there in the system, which suddenly gives a huge new plethora of data out there as well. And we are actually looking and in conversations with adding some of the chart music, certainly from the likes of China. But for example, I know we're working with, we've had some very interesting conversations with people that have actually been studying popular Mongolian music as well. So we've even got some Mongolian charts in there, believe it or not. It very much is open to interpretation. I mean, all we're doing here at MusicID is very much saying, here is the information that is out there, that is available, and we'll make it as accessible to you as possible. But it's up to you to put the stories behind it. It's up to you to actually interpret it from that side of things.
How geographically specific can this be? Like, could this be a tour planning tool of, I'm getting a lot of streams in Ohio and not Illinois, so I should drive my tour that way? Like, how much does it narrow down geographically?
That's a good question. So it depends on the area, but predominantly it is country based, or it's based on the chart. As it was, whether or not it's the country chart, or it could be contemporary funk chart from whatever it is. So at the moment that isn't there. I know that I think Craig's got some good knowledge of this. It is available through some various other systems, but obviously this is designed to be an academic tool. That's how it's always been built. Yeah. And it is designed to be there to assist with research, to be which is what it's used for. We're regularly cited with people doing their dissertations, their PhDs. We're now seen as a resource. We've been around long enough. We're used by all of the major research institutions, certainly in the US, and increasingly so in Europe as well now. Yeah, and someone's just asked about pricing as well. I mean, we're crazily affordable. We've always made sure that that's the case. Katie does have a response to this as well. She said on the Asian side of things, sorry, just coming back if you don't mind, Jeff. Off the top of her head, she said that for Asian charts, many Asian countries don't have an official record chart in the way that we have the official charts company here in the UK, or Billboard, and the way in which they standardize metrics. They do exist in Japan. So there is a lot of interaction between that and Western media. So there is a lot of stuff. There's a big question, obviously, at the moment in and around Philippines being probably the biggest music maker in some instances in terms of influencing people breaking the charts these days, which is always interesting as well. But again, is that coming through because they're one of the biggest users of social media or not? These are the interesting conversations that everybody's, you know, coming up with at the moment, and can be interpreted using the data that's available for everyone in the system. So yeah, but going back to your piece, Jeff, it's not designed to be a commercial tool in that sense. It very much is one to open up a lot of questions in that sense. If you look at some of Craig's work, that's quite helpful to see where live gigs are taking place. You might want to pop on the chat, Craig, your link to your website again, but visualizing sort of where people are for that. But I don't know, it's not designed to do that, Jeff, is the short answer, but it is designed to be the main aggregation of charts from all over the globe. It's the biggest resource and archive that's available for that. And there's some nice pieces for anyone that wants to see it at a later date. We can always do another demonstration, or happy to show it to anybody. Anyone who wants that, just reach out to us on the chat. There's some very interesting information. It does go back all the way to 1900. So obviously pre-1950s, pre-Billboard and the alleged start of charts, however you want to debate that as academics and musicologists. Obviously sheet music was the big indicator of how people were, what music was popular. So we've actually got a clear understanding of the sort of the top 100, top 10 for every single year since 1900 in terms of that side of things. So it's a wealth of information there, and again, you can compare all of these different things in any way against it. Craig's just given a very simple demonstration of the tool as it's visualized, but it can be used in very, very complex ways as well, if that answers your question. I've definitely got a question for the audience that's here at the moment. Very interested to learn what are the key sort of data sets, or what are the key data tools that people are using at the moment, if you're involved in education, if you're involving educating, and or even as students that you've been exposed to. What are the ones that have had a big impact on you, or what would you like to see? What is missing? Because that's the big question we're asking, and we're getting a lot of great feedback from a lot of professors all over the globe at the moment about what is missing out there in terms of, you know, bringing data sets together. Because it's a lot, we have a lot of partners involved. You know, we work with the likes of Who Sampled and Music Brains and people like that, and you know, we're really keen to understand how can we bring together to help everyone involved in either teaching or in research. How can we actually bring together the sort of data sets that people are looking for? So I don't know if that's anyone's got any specific bugbears on that, or anything that they use regularly or they find good that they're happy to share with the community here. Any thoughts from anyone on a Friday lunchtime?
I mean, I certainly think getting Spotify data through it is useful. As someone who's interested in digital music, you know, Spotify don't really want to give people too much information, so the fact that you can get anything in it is useful. So, you know, particularly for asking questions around, you mentioned the Philippines and other places, you know, those music cities where new artists are being broken because it's cheaper to break an artist through streams in India than it is to break an artist in New York or LA or London, for example. That's quite interesting in terms of the globalization of music industries. But you know, these newer digital companies aren't particularly great at giving out information to either labels or artists. So having that information is really useful. But yeah, there comes a point where I guess they aren't going to give you this stuff because it's part of their business model. But so having the stream thing is really good for me, I think.
And just as a general FYI for everybody, because I'm conscious we're coming up to the hour as well, and Armin likes to keep things tight too. It is worth noting, a lot of you are probably thinking, well, this is all great, but it's probably outside the realms of my faculty, or I've got to go cap in hand to Music Librarian and see how on earth can I get some more funding for another resource. But from the MusicID's perspective, we're here to support the academic community. We're not like most other publishers, and actually our prices haven't changed in over 5 years, and they're not intending to. For anyone who's a MEIEA member, as I said, we're offering that 15% discount for the course of the year while we're proud sponsors of the MEIEA Meets events. And so the cost of a MusicID annual subscription for an entire institution, and that is unlimited access, that is unlimited users, unlimited downloads of information, with a 15% discount for MEIEA members, is just under $1,700. That's for an entire year for an entire institution. So if that isn't fantastic value, I don't know what is, especially with, you know, a huge volume of information as an archive. As I said, nearly 500 million rows of data now within there that can be interrogated and interpreted. We're also open to individual licenses as well for researchers and academics that want to use the system. And if it's something that you want to learn more about, see much more of the system itself, Craig's just shown you one of the modules. There's 3 modules that make up MusicID. Then just reach out to us. Happily send you contact information, happily have a quick conversation with you or give you a more detailed demonstration, and help you through the process. We're used to working with lots of music librarians, so we know how they think, and we know often the hoops that you have to jump through in order to get things moved forward. But it's incredibly affordable, and we're very proud of the amazing institutions that have been, proud MusicID customers for a long time. Not ashamed to say, the likes of NYC, UCLA, Harvard, a lot of institutions, and the clients have been so for a very, very long time. We're here to welcome more. The big thing that we're doing at the moment, though, is about reaching out to the community. So as you'll see from the website, if you're happy to go there, we hold regular events like this. We don't just do it for MEIEA Meets. And we're actually about encouraging, how do we get all of our academic community together? How do we help them to actually exchange ideas? How do we share concepts with them? How do we help them to improve their teaching or improve their research? Can we link them up together? And through a lot of these events, which you'll see on our Humanities Commons pages, and also through our social media, and most importantly through our website, we're doing these all the time. So Craig will be leading out on a few of them. We've got quite a number of other very esteemed academics who will be coming through with various case studies and various ideas. And we just really want to help give everybody as much inspiration as we can. How can you actually get data literacy taught? How can you provide vocational skills to your students? And actually, most importantly, help everybody understand how important actually having having data is important no matter where it's sourced from, and how do you then interpret it in the appropriate way. So I do just want to thank Craig again for your tutorials. We have an entire curriculum pack with lots of lessons like this that are coming out that we can make exclusive to MEIEA members. So if you're interested in learning more about that, we can send you the brochure. So please drop us your email address, and we can get that sent out to you as well now. If there's anything else, Armin, that you want to contribute, or
yes,
anyone else join up, then there we go. So thank you everybody for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Craig, Paul, Katie, and the rest of the MusicID group. Really appreciate it. You will receive information from MusicID directly if you signed up for this event. We will also post this session online, so if you want to revisit or chat with any of the MusicID folks, you will get information from them directly. Have a great summer, and hopefully we will talk and have some more MusicID events this fall when we talk more about MEIEA Meets, and we try to focus on some research events during the fall. So we'll definitely check in with MusicID then. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great summer. Thanks.